Welcome back, students of HDL and teachers of HDL.
Yes, exactly.
Learn, teach, learn.
I was fixing to say that. Yeah. There we go.
Welcome, our avid studiers of human consciousness.
We're gonna get right into the show because this is interesting. I don't know how to pronounce his name correctly. Of course, it's Ben. Here you can see it right here. Bentino Massaro.
Bentino Massaro.
Yeah, Massaro.
Bentino Massaro.
So he wrote an article, and I thought it was really interesting. So I thought we could kind of go through the article and we'll talk about it because there's some key words in here. Not only are we going to talk about consciousness, we're going to talk about perception. We're going to talk about observation. We're going to talk about reality.
Yeah.
And all of that. And then how we've based these laws of these scientific laws.
Yeah. A lot of our scientific laws, a lot of them are based on assumption. And you also have to understand what essentially is a scientific law and how it's classified as a law. I'm just flipping through these papers to sound like I'm intelligent. Actually look like I know.
That's how I have them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I have the papers.
Or you know what? I love walking into a place. I have like a clipboard right here.
Oh yeah, that's the best.
I can walk in anywhere.
You can go in anywhere. Yeah.
Put a high vis vest on me at the same time.
Oh.
I'm just walking through things.
Yeah. You are a pizza guy.
Yeah.
Like a pizza guy, if he holds a pizza, he could be a terrorist and walk into
you never know. Yeah. UPS
the
guy.
CIA. Yeah.
There's
UPS.
some things where we're just like,
yeah, we just say,
fuck it, buddy.
But I think when we think about it, it's our perception that person is fine.
Oh, nice bridge.
Yes. You know what I mean? We look at the identity of that person and think they have a uniform on.
So then what is that saying about you observing that person? You're saying that my reality is that this person I'm safe with. I don't really know.
They have a function.
I don't know anything about their life, whatever. I just associate what they're wearing with a function of what they have to do, and I perceive no threat from it.
Yes.
Okay? So my perceiving of what I think is the truth has no truthful basis to it, I'm assuming, but then I go and live my life through that experience of assumption and assume that's the truth.
Yes. Yeah. And where in reality, he could be putting Chinese spyware in the server room.
Yeah. And so now let's...
and he's not a UPS driver.
No. And so now let's communist Chinese spyware.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll call it that. Because not all Chinese people put spyware in server rooms.
Yes.
So... the way I want to then look at that is like, how does then that metaphor of this UPS pizza guy, whatever he might be, actually lead into
clipboard, high vis vest,
clipboard, high vid vest, whoever that could be, me. How does that lead into our current scientific approach? Well, the scientific approach is like me as a scientist. Okay, I know that this thing I'm studying has a function. Okay, but I'm not really sure what it is I'm trying to solve, or if the thing I am trying to solve is the right thing to solve. So is it proper for me to think of that UPS guy as a UPS guy or to think of him as a terrorist?
Right.
I'm actually unsure of what the final outcome is.
Right.
Because I don't live within that person's reality. So when we look at how, Bentino Massaro looks at this, he's saying the scientist then lives its life on a basis of assumption, assuming that this is what needs to be searched for, when it's not really the fundamental thing that it should be looking at as a scientist from a scientific approach. And then you write these laws or come up with these ideas or use theories that are fundamentally not based on reality. They're based on the scientists or group of scientists' perspective on what they think is the foundation of reality itself.
Yeah, because science is always trying to separate consciousness from it.
Right. And
that's why he's trying to build a bridge on.
He's trying to build a bridge, much like what we do. Both of them, one's a material world, one's not immaterial.
Right.
But to say they're separate, or say that I'm going to find a particle, some source particle, some God particle in the material world, and have that separate from everything else, how could that possibly be? If it's one thing that takes control and definition of all things, well, then it would have to apply to the world you can't see also. This world of perspective, this immaterial world, would it not? I found the God particle. Well, it would have to define both, seen and unseen. So when Bentino Massaro looks at this and it says why 99% of scientists are unscientific in their approach, he said, and this is his opening paragraph, the reason conventional science will never find God or a source element is because God, if we define God as the source of all things, is consciousness itself. Consciousness is the source element. It is the father, uppercase F, of all perception knowledge and is therefore the essence of what we call the world or existence. They're searching for this material thing. But in reality, like we've said many, many times following creational laws, is that thought defines reality. It's not reality defining thought. You have to think of a rule, a system of logic first before logic becomes applied. You have to conceptually come up with an atom before the use of that atom can be applied, or thinking about how to use that atom. We are the smith of our own destiny. Thoughts are might. It's the might of our thoughts. Those are the things that direct what our perception and reality of the world is. And that is the thing that happens specifically with consciousness, not a God particle defining how my consciousness operates. So then in the totality of our universe, we need to look at our own self-realization of who we are in our own consciousness by looking inward. So do the scientists, and we need to study internally what's going on with us so that then we can understand what reality truly is. Because our thoughts and our consciousness define that reality. And if we can all come to the same realization of creational truths, if we can distill down within us what's happening internally and how those truths then also resonate on what we're seeing, now, at that moment, you have bridged the immaterial world, the world of consciousness, with the material world. Because these laws here also work with these laws out here. So now I'm not working on assumptions. I'm working on observable experience.
Yes, and that's what he gets into when he talks about experiences, and that was, you're leading me right into it, that if everything is based in and dependent upon consciousness, then you're never going to find a world apart from experiences.
That's correct, because the world is experience. When a
Right.
scientist goes through a process or a hypothesis of testing something, it's experience of that testing.
Right.
That's what it is. What is their experience? And then they write the perspective of what they observed. But is the function of how you observe the same as how everyone observes? Is it the same as not how a star is observing you as a third party, or a sun from its perspective, or how energy observes you, right? Or how is consciousness in its collective sense look at you? That's the thing. They look at it from one specific limelight, but it lacks the unity of the totality of consciousness. If the universe is consciousness, which we know, sound before form, and then you have that thought, that vibratory pattern that's happening in here. And if creation comes up with these very rational, logical laws that we live by, because if they weren't, the universe would fold in on itself. Physics wouldn't exist if there weren't predefined logical things. Well, then we need to make sure that what's happening with those thoughts of logic also align with our scientific approach. And that's a function of experience. Creation experiences itself by dividing its spirit, right? These pieces of spirit into all of us. Like it sends you out there. Okay, go learn for me. Like we're all of its little babies. And after we've grown up over millions and millions and millions of years and assimilated knowledge, we can bring that experience back to creation. So it can be like, was my hypothesis correct?
Right.
Did my rules in logic actually work out? Oh, matter of fact, they did. It's actually evolving its own evolution. And through the structure of consciousness, of a thought of its own evolution, it allows reality to then manifest in that same mirrored form.
Yeah, and I think if we go back to the UPS driver and we look at first assumption, we're going to say without a doubt that this is a UPS driver. So he has the truck. This is what scientists are doing. He has the truck. He has the uniform. He's functioning as a UPS driver. He has packages.
Yeah.
This. But our first assumption is that he is a UPS driver.
Yeah.
And so based off of that, we're creating all these rules for us to be able to do testing off of that assumption.
That's correct. So if we live in a world where we experience belief, where all we're doing is believing because we don't have the facts, and then we start to root our scientific theory and observations from a lack of facts. So that means before you even start your whole experiment, it's based completely on assumptions. There's no fundamental base to support this in some logical reality that makes sense. There's no introspection or self-realization that happened with the scientist first before he goes in and be like, oh, and this is how I should actually be observing it. So when we come to, when we're at HDL and we're talking about even creational laws, when you begin to apply those to things through your own experience, you start to derive wisdom from it, because these are foundational pieces of creation, how creation chooses to operate. And it affects the physical world as it affects the material. So you can use that as your hypothesis and testing format as your own scientist. And so to take the method of self-investigation is the first thing you should do. Be a scientific of your consciousness, a scientist of your consciousness. Be a scientist of your own spirit. Test it, work with it, find out who you are, look internally. But the lack of value, listen, there's a lot of good things that have come from science. And we've done a lot of stuff on assumption. And, we've gotten pretty close to what we find is the truth. And we say it's a law. They don't know for a fact because in science, a law is defined by something that has been observed many, 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 many times, and there hasn't been some sort of outlier that falls outside of this current range or rule that we had predefined through our hypothesis. So it's a hypothesis that's been tested so many times that it doesn't have a high probability of change. That in the scientific community, they call that a law.
Right.
Is it the truth? Is it really a law? Well, I don't know. Do you go deeper?
It's not because, and he talks about this, it's not because it's just perception.
Yeah, we're perceiving that it is the law.
Yes.
Because we started with an assumption, and it's continued to fit into our assumption for so long.
Right.
But we all know you can live your whole life thinking one thing, and then in a moment it can be shattered.
Well, I mean, I always think of the analogy whenever you take somebody and maybe they've only been 10 miles. And we used to have that back in the day. If you look at tribes or groups of people, they may have only explored 30 miles, 60 miles, 90 miles, maybe, they just walked. And so maybe to go to another tribe to war, however it may, but that would be their experience.
Yeah. That
would be their whole experience, and their whole perception of the world would be based off of. If you transported them from upper Canada and brought them to Africa, it would blow their minds, or put them in a jet, or
maybe
what I mean?
Maybe in a certain state of truth and reality, and then you remove them from it.
Yes.
It's like when the tribal people of Central America were on the coast, and you had the Spanish ships coming in.
Right.
Even though they were on the horizon line, invisible, they could not see them because they sat outside of their perception of reality. It is an unknown thing to them, so it's not there. The mind, at a distance, in an optical sense, with how the nerves work and how light is perceived and registered in the brain, if you have not seen it before, up close to understand what it is or have a conceptual image of it, at a far distance, when it's not perfectly in focus, you'll never truly know what it is. It's essentially invisible. But that's the experience they live in. So if you uproot someone from this, what they think is reality, even though there are all these other pieces out here that you can't see because you've never looked into them, you've never truly focused, well, then you're not living in a state of truth. You're living in the state of hypothesis or assumption that no possible giant wooden ship could have come from somewhere across this globe to land on my land.
Mm-hmm.
Who are these people? They really don't exist to you. But then when they come in, they uproot your reality.
Yes.
Okay, because you've lived your life on an assumption that we're safe here as a tribe and nothing could ever cross that ocean.
Based on your limited experience.
Based on your limited experience. And so if you continue to refine your experiences and focus on them, that allows you to create a sense of wisdom. And that self-realization, that introspective look on who you are, allows you to evolve your state of consciousness. And by removing the false realities and focusing on a creational truth, something's logical that's happened that I can realize that is observable within myself and outside of myself, that is something I should fundamentally root myself in. So then through that observation, it's not shocking, it does not tear my world apart, but now it begins to make a lot of sense. And then my further experiences become much deeper and much richer. And when, Bentino is looking at these scientists, what he's saying is you need to take these steps of that self-realization before you even move into living in a world of hypothesis and assumption for searching for something that is the totality of all.
Yeah, and I love he uses this word assumption free, but we need to intensely focus. We have to have our conscious needs to be focused on consciousness itself. And so living this life of zero assumptions. So, getting, and we all want this, getting our mind to that zero state,
mm-hmm.
And I see what he's saying, like in the sense of, because I want to make this real practical. So if you could walk into a room, a business room, let's say there's a group of leaders in there and you're going to have a meeting with them. Well, our monkey brains instantly walk into that room. This guy has a suit on. We're even judging people. This guy's, he's the CEO. I saw it on the website. He's the important one. All these assumptions begin to happen. And then that begins to control the experience in the room. We may intentionally look at the CEO a little bit more. We want feedback from him, see if he's listening, if he's paying attention, is he on his phone? This guy over here is this role. So in that role, what is he doing? Is my presentation feel threatened because of him? So there's so many dynamics when you look at it, where zero state would be you walk in the room with no judgment.
Yep.
You look at everyone as completely equal.
All in a state of learning.
Yeah, all in a state of,
Assume a complete state of unknowledge.
Yeah, and then from that, you're giving a presentation in full unity and being totally present in that moment without any fear or assumptions.
That's correct. It's like a bunch of scientists at CERN show up to your laboratory at Berkeley, and they're like, "We saw a God particle," and you're like, "What's a God particle?"
Yeah,
and it's like, "Why are you calling it a God particle?" And they're like, "Oh, we're onto it." And then you're like, "Well, I got to start searching for it." What about their assumptions? What about how they perceive reality? Maybe they've been too close to it for too long,
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? But they're coming in and you're like, I got to start searching for it. And then another guy writes a paper on it. It's like, well, if they're searching for the God particle, maybe I can kind of find it. Well, who defines it as a God particle? Where does that come from? Whose basis of reality for that is? Do you even know where the term, God is coined from in a certain sense of etymology? And if you look at the translation of God from the Hebrew, Yahweh, up to, the God we have now, Yahweh just means king of wisdom.
Yes.
King of wisdom. It's not a God. It's not someone that has power over you. It's someone that has an extensive amount of knowledge and experience that are blended together to find that wisdom. Doesn't make them a God. But when we look at that, we're saying, it's that all-consuming power over everything. So again, by calling a particle the God particle and saying that has control over everything else, that's already goes against any sort of creational truth you could naturally observe by looking at the universe and looking at yourself.
Yes.
You should know, hold on, guys. This is loaded with dogma. It's loaded with assumption. It's loaded with belief. That's not a way we want to go about this. This is not scientific in that approach.
Yeah, and he says this, we must use the primary and indeed only means of knowledge, consciousness.
Consciousness. What he's saying, you need to look at thought because that thought defines experience. That's the focus. And we've been touting this for a long time. The point of this show is to help people learn about themselves, to find that self-realization, to give people the tools and the knowledge for that introspection of life, right? To bring those two worlds together, not to separate them. Okay, not to be as a scientist or a person of belief, but a person of knowing. It's a person of thinking for themselves, not being swayed by assumptions.
Yeah, and he says this, and I love this. Only consciousness can know consciousness.
Well, yeah, of course, nothing can know consciousness except for another thought. The knowing is a function of consciousness, so it can never sit outside of it.
Yeah, because knowing, in truth, there are no other means of knowing anything. We just assume that they are. And so, in other words, only God can know God, or consciousness can know consciousness. Yeah, and I get what he's saying because, like I said, I always try to break this down in a simpler format. If I am coming into any thought with an assumption, then I am not coming into consciousness.
I'm not respecting consciousness.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not respecting creational consciousness, and I'm not respecting my own. Because I'm coming in assuming what I think is the truth. I lack observation.
It's unproven. Yeah. So how can it be truth?
You can only do consciousness, right? We can only internally record it. Well, that is also a function of right now with our technology, we don't have the ability or sensitive enough instruments to actually pick up on consciousness. And that's what it is. So if we lack that sort of measurement right now, well, then we need to focus on it from internal truths first, rather than just assuming that entire world and collecting what that knowledge might be.
Yeah, I love this. He says, if we define the scientific approach as being an attitude of observing without falling prey to bias and assumptions to the best of our ability. So let's get into bias. That's an important word. And I know he highlighted this, falling prey to bias.
Yeah, bias.
That's the problem we have right now with everything that's going on.
It's bias. It's two. It's a pole shift, right? Either this or that. I'm swayed to one side or the other. It lacks the equanimity. We talk about positive, neutral, equalized thoughts. The consciousness is equalized. It takes the negative, it takes the positive, brings them together, equalize them, and then you refine that into a positive, evolutive thought. Okay? That's what needs to happen. But when you're biased, you don't equalize those energies. You lay to one or the other, and that lack of balance, again, does not sit inside of a creational foundational law, the law of equality, right? You can't just have all causes all day long. It's cause and effect.
So
It's interaction. It's both. It's that constant balance.
So our thought should be questioning perception.
All the time. You should always question the perception, because in doing so, it helps you refine your experience to say, was this a truthful experience? From how you know what a creational law is rational. Is that truly rational? Are my assumptions rational? Obviously not, because it's an assumption. It's an irrational thing. And to be completely irrational, you don't have those assumptions. You observe and say, does this work here, and does this work here? Yes or no?
Yeah, and self-realization, because this is an important word in what you're talking about right now and where we're going into it. And we always look at that as being like self-help and, you know, positive, this positive mentality. But what you're talking about is this self-realization to understand the thoughts that we have.
Yeah.
And if I really look at my thoughts, a lot of them are biased and negative. And we talked about thoughts a couple episodes ago, but if you really start to be, you self-realize or become self-aware and say, if thoughts are controlling my reality, and that reality is fundamentally moved and guided by my assumptions, then I need to look at that and say, what am I? So for me, how I would look at it is to say, I'm walking into a situation. Why am I assuming?
You know, why am I assuming?
Yeah.
And then when you're in that situation, you go through this system of cause and effect,
Right,
based on a bad assumption. Whether it's good or bad, you're just doing things kind of ad hoc. So now you're creating this world of probabilities, and you're truly unsure of the outcome, whether the outcome is going to be truthful, because when you walked in, you were already completely askew. Okay, you are the smith of your own destiny, and that is the function of your own thoughts. Thoughts drive everything. And you need that self-realization. It's not having positive thoughts all the time. Self-realization is allowing the thoughts to come through and say, I am going to check those thoughts.
right.
I'm going to say, what's the energy? What was the basis for it? What drove it in here? What is the assumption? What's the underlying factor that caused me to have that? Where was that trigger? And then how can I equalize it, whether it's positive or negative, and turn it into something that is evolutive to myself?
Yeah, and he said this, I enjoy imagining a parallel reality where spirituality is called science and science is called spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. So he's just talking about an inverse world where our biggest study is the study of ourselves first, rather than just studying the material world on assumption.
Yeah, and he has a PS, and I think this is important because we're not ragging on science. He said, I actually love conventional science and fully encourage its continuation. However, beware of scientific pride rooted in and he highlights this word, belief of a material, independently existent world. There is literally zero proof for its existence.
Yeah, there's zero proof for our material world completely existing by itself, and there's no immaterial world, no world of thought, no world of non-locality, which is obviously ridiculous. That's an insane statement.
Yeah, so he likes to call it the science of self-realization.
Yeah.
And then that, to me, that seems like pure science.
That's pretty much what we're trying to do over here.
And to me, that would be whenever we're looking at it and we're understanding and believing. I don't want to use the word believe.
You can't understand and believe at the same time.
Yes, exactly. I was correcting myself in there. But whenever you look at consciousness in and of itself, then I am looking at that and saying, am I making an assumption right now in this thought that I'm having? And through that thought, I'm allowing it to guide my perception of the action that I'm going to create, and thus creates a cause and effect.
Correct.
So I'm creating. Now, how am I creating? You know, that's where self-realization would come for me. This cause that this cause that I'm fixing to create, what is going to be the effect? So, and that's where you got like X2, you know, now I'm like, oh, okay. So, okay, I'm going to say these words to this person. Let's get really basic. I'm going to say these words to this person. What is the effect of these words to that person?
Right.
Is it going to, and then now I can judge it, you know, in a good way. Like I can sit there and say, like a scales, you know, I can say, am I being, you know, truthful?
Yeah.
There's one.
Respectful,
am I
loving,
being
harmonious.
Am I uniting?
Yeah.
You know, that's been a big word for me here lately, unity personally in my life. You know, what I'm saying, is it bringing unity?
Yeah. Is it elevating their thoughts?
Yes. Is it elevating their thoughts?
Is what everything I say helping them evolve?
Right.
There was you remember the old statement, live and let live?
Yes. Yeah. When they're James Bond, like
Live and Let Die.
Yeah.
Great film.
Yes.
But Live and Let Live is a terrible, terrible statement that has been falsely pushed into our world, our history. You know, there's a lot of dogma of the church doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, live and let live. You know, people are their own sinners. Well, in truth, it's a function of, and you talk about unity and helping other people evolve, it's live and help live. Because when you live and let live, it's a biased world. It's a world of polarity. It's a world of, you know, non-unity. It's separative. But when you say live and help live, that means you can live your life with your own experience and then help others find their own experiences to come together. Your conversation changes. If I'm here to help you live, Jason, I'm not going to say anything that separates you. I'm going to say things that bring us together within that common ground. I'm going to say things that allow you to think for yourself. I'm going to say things that say, okay, this helps Jason make proper choices for himself without me telling him what to do. I'm not stepping on your free will. That's a much more evolutive, unifying, harmonious way to do things. So much like you have a positive, neutral, equalized thought within your own consciousness and in this world of consciousness, your situation in the material world is also positive, neutral, and equalized. And that is a great path that you want to take forward. So that path of self-realization, it starts with you. That's your first tool. And you have all the tools to do it. It's just a matter of you sitting down and starting to pay attention to it.
Yeah, and I think looking at these tools, and we'll close in this, when we look at these tools, we know meditation is primarily probably
the best tool ever.
Yeah, the best tool. Yeah, I think thinking, just plain out thinking before you do an action.
Yeah, ruminate on it.
Yes.
You know? Outside of
That's why I like the old days. You know, the old days was like cool. People were like, I was reading an article yesterday, and they were talking about like guys would wake up at like 3 a.m. I'm talking like 1700s and stuff, and they would go chop wood, or they would read a book by candlelight, you know, before early morning, and they would kind of like, it's almost like your whether they needed a mental stimulation, a physical stimulation, you know, a spiritual stimulation, whatever it may be, they were like setting themselves up for the action that they were going to create throughout the day, you know, and whether you're meditating, whether you're doing affirmations, whatever it may be for you, you know, like I was listening to the Schumann resonance, you know, the other day, and I just had it playing for like 2 hours, you know,
right.
So I'm getting this earth frequency, in my body, and it energized me, and whatever it may be, that for me, that perception is right, good, and allowing me to have a higher consciousness. So that sets it up, whether I'm communicating with you or whoever I may communicate, I'm communicated in unity.
Yeah, you're priming the pipe of cause and effect for your day.
Yes, priming the pipe. Yeah,
greasing the skids.
Yeah, yeah. Love that, old school.
Well, listen, all of our listeners, this is not a bash on the scientific community. Much like what, you know, we're just reviewing what Bentino said and how that applies to, you know, the learning of your own spirit, a world that's material and immaterial, and bringing those things together. Okay,
Love it.
Grease your own skids.